Democracy, demokratia in the Greek, means power of the people. But let's be honest, democracy in New Zealand and much of the rest of the Western world is in its death throes. It is, isn't it? If you think democracy is kicking along fine, you really are failing to understand the times in which we live. In the USA, the President is now signing off on decisions without reference to Congress. 9/11 has been used as an excuse to cut swaths through the people's natural rights. Laws that affect those people's rights are being passed without proper examination by the people's representatives. Habeas corpus and positatis have all but gone. Like Christianity or not, the fact is it is being suppressed in complete defiance of the US Constitution, and the Supreme Court is using judicial activism to make key decisions that should properly be referred to the people. Free speech is only what is allowed to be free. An oligarchy of self-appointed elitists are trampling US democracy underfoot and proclaiming a new world order. So whose order is it exactly? And are they alone? Sadly, they are not. The cancerous clan of self-appointed overlords are everywhere. They're in Europe and they're over here in New Zealand too. Putting Switzerland's shining democratic example aside, Europe may be in even worse shape. A whole bunch of unelected bureaucrats are giving themselves power the people have never approved, and European governments are giving them the right to do it, without reference to their own people. When the people have been given a chance to speak in polls and referenda, they have shouted no, but to no effect. They are ignored. Fascism and communism may have been defeated, but the human drive to power and tyranny is alive and strutting its stuff across the Western world. So what about little old New Zealand, the nation that was first to give women the right to vote? I'm afraid democracy in our little Pavlova paradise is now a charade, a pantomime, a hollow shell. Remember the National Party and its leader John Key before the last election? We won't raise GST, he said. Carbon credits, an emissions trading scheme, that's not on the agenda. And as for those Maori seats, well, they should be abolished. What do we have just 2 short years later? And national government joined at the hip to the Maori Party, the complete dismissal of the people's will over the anti-smacking legislation, a back down on tougher drinking laws, the destruction, I can't think of a better way of putting it, of elected public authorities in Auckland and Canterbury, a rise in GST, a marine and coastal areas bill that sanctions an ever-growing apartheid regime for Maori corporate elite, and a pointless emissions trading scheme that takes money out of everyone's pocket and gives it to foreign forestry companies. And that's only one government raising its hind leg on honesty and democracy. Go back at least 15 years and the same pattern of subterfuge, misinformation and broken promises relentlessly winds its way through our recent history. The rancid icing on this mouldy cake, especially if we ignore the aimless management of the economy, is the Marine and Coastal Areas Bill, which threatens to eventually sign over vast areas of New Zealand's coastline to a minority people whose only claim rests on the fact that they picked pippies and kinna off the beaches first. What a complete travesty all of this is. How have we got into this fetid mess? That's easy. We allowed it to happen. We put our own creature comforts ahead of the principles that make for freedom and prosperity. Aldous Huxley saw it all coming before he wrote Brave New World. We would rather watch Corro Street, sip our additive-free beer and contemplate our next espresso at our favourite cafe than stand up for what makes us a free people. When challenged to look to some higher ideals, most of us scratch uncomfortably and roll our eyes. It's just way too tiresome to think about the lives lost and the sacrifice made by so many over centuries, including our own grandparents in 2 world wars. Well, shame on you apathetic, comfort-centred New Zealanders. Many of you are more concerned about the All Blacks winning the Tri-Nations and the Silver Ferns beating Australia than you are about the state of our nation. Thankfully, many of us are not like that. We do care, and we don't buy into that cop-out line, well, what can I do about it anyway? But there is more to it than that. We seem to think that voting every so many years is democracy. You've got to be joking. Ticking a few boxes every 3 years is democracy? Who told you that? Look, the vote is to democracy what a carburetor is to an internal combustion engine, a means to an end. Essential for sure, but by no means near the whole story. In case you've missed it, and it seems that most of you have, real democracy is founded on some essential principles. Lose them and you've lost democracy. Here are my top 7 democratic principles. Read up on men like Tocqueville, Montesquieu and Chesterton if you want to get into more detail. My first principle is that no citizen should live in fear of another. The second is that truth and freedom must never be sacrificed for safety. The third is that people should be left in final control of the most important things in their lives. 4, that equality must never triumph over liberty. 5, that liberty exists to do only what is just and good. 6, that central government must not do what local communities can do for themselves. And 7, that power should be equally shared by all the people. In case you miss these vital principles, take the time to track back and write them down. They are really important. If you are concerned about human freedom, democracy and rights, and you haven't been brainwashed into believing you're an ignorant nobody who should leave the affairs of your own country to a bunch of lawyers and teachers who joined a political party and think they can do things better than you, then may I respectfully suggest where you can start. Go to the principle I mentioned last. Power should be equally shared by all the people. The only way that can happen is if the people have the final say on anything Parliament makes law, through binding citizens-initiated referenda. Add to that what is called the People's Initiative. Any citizen should have the right to propose a law or a policy, and the people should have the right to say yay or nay through referenda binding on national or local government. When you have that, you are on the way to real democracy, and those other principles I mentioned should fall into place. Now, in case you are thinking I'm just swinging the chain, think again. The Swiss have had real direct democracy through BCIR, binding citizens initiated referenda, for 140 years, and it works well. It works really well. There's a website you can go to find out more. It's www.realdemocracy.co.nz. You can play your part in a word-of-mouth revolution the folks at Real Democracy are calling the Purple Revolution. Go forth and proselytise for New Zealand's future. Make converts for freedom and democracy. Find out about the Swiss referenda system and convince others of its vital importance if democracy and our freedoms are to survive. It's not the final answer, but it is an absolutely essential, vital first step. Watch this cyberspace. There will be more.